Hi guys, I'm Naha. Welcome back to 30 Days of Tarot, where I'm going to be opening this giant pile of tarot decks for you over the course of the next month. Now, we've seen a couple of more recent decks, things that have just come out. Today's going to be a little bit different. This is a video for those of you who really like tarot history, especially the kind of trail of breadcrumbs that you can start following when you really start going back in time, especially exploring occult avenues. And I'm the kind of person who, if I'm reading a book and it refers to another book and references an older book or source material, then I need to go get that book, and then that book refers me to another even older book, and then before you know it, I'm in a down the rabbit hole. So that's kind of what happened with the deck that I'm going to show you guys today. So go ahead, settle on in, grab your tea, especially if you have your 22 Teachings mug that you got on 22teachings.com, the Triple Blessings. And let's explore this together, shall we? So just to give you a little bit of background, I think that a lot of you guys, if you've been following this channel, then you know that I am a student of the Western Mysteries and that I've been trained in Golden Dawn magic, and Golden Dawn correspondences are the ones that I practice, the ones that I teach, especially when it comes to tarot and the astrological correspondences and the Hebrew letter correspondences that go along with the tarot. And if you're going like, wait a second, astrology, Hebrew, where do those even fall in? What does that even have to do with the tarot? Just know that that is definitely the more esoteric, more occult sort of route of looking at things. It's not just about meanings of cards. There really is an underlying system there. Now, over the years, the system has changed, and definitely Golden Dawn, even though that Rider-Waite deck that was made by Golden Dawn Magician came out over 100 years ago, it's still relatively modern in the history of tarot. And before that, Golden Dawn changed the associations. Before that, there was a lot of different systems. And so what we're going to look at today is some of the older systems which have actually still influenced modern decks today. Another deck that a lot of people know besides the Rider-Waite deck is the old Marseille deck, and it's a very standard deck. It's what's called a pip style deck, meaning that while it has the 22 major arcana, the minor arcana don't have scenes depicted the way that the Rider-Waite Smith deck does. It just has the suits, more like how regular playing cards are. So people are familiar with Marseille, and that's a deck that's been reprinted and recreated over and over again. But the branch that we're looking at kind of stemmed from Marseille and kind of brought some other things in as well. So this kind of goes back, in my knowledge, back to the beginning of the time when I started working at House of Intuition. Now, if you live in Los Angeles, you probably know about House of Intuition because we've opened up a lot of stores and they sell all kinds of magical things. But in the beginning, one of the things that we had was books, but we had just a minimal selection. Just everything was very sparse. And so one of the things that we did to kind of fill the shop a little bit is that we would buy old used lots of esoteric and occult books and sell used books. And so in one of those packages of, buy like 100 used books, we had gotten this book. And it's Wisdom of the Tarot, and it's by Elizabeth H. Now, Elizabeth H. is obviously a tarot author, but there's a book that I actually want to recommend of hers, which I loved. It was recommended reading from my teachers to me. It's called Initiation, and it's a story about past lives and ancient Egypt and sacred geometry. It's a really great book, not necessarily about tarot, but I knew that this author, because of that book. So I was taking a look at this, and as I'm opening it up, I'm like, okay, this looks pretty cool, obviously anything on tarot. And then I look to the back. And in the back of this book, you will see there's a little plastic pocket that contains some cards. And so take a look at these. Now, they are just only 22 here, and they are just the 22 majors. Oh, and so, of course, I thought, wow, this is pretty special. You can still get this book, but it doesn't come with cards anymore. Now, what these cards are is they were a deck that was created, not by H, but actually by this guy named Oswald Wirth. And he was a Swiss occultist. He was an author himself. And he actually made these 22 major arcana back in 1889. Now, you might say these look an awful lot like the Marseille cards, and he largely drew his influence from the Marseille deck. The difference is down here. And what you're going to notice is that the cards here are numbered in the keys, and right here he has placed the Hebrew letters. So the first one he has, the magician, is called the juggler, the letter Aleph, and then high priestess, the letter Bet, and the empress, Gimel, and so forth. Now this is different from Golden Dawn, because with Golden Dawn they start Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, with the Fool. Now where is the Fool, you might ask? Well, in this series you will find the Fool all the way towards the end, in between the 20th key, which is Judgment, and the last card, which is numbered the 22nd key, the World, and in between those you see the Fool, the Fool. Doesn't have a number, doesn't say 21, but we know that its placement is here because it does have the Hebrew letter Shin, and Shin is the second to last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, so it is placed here in between Judgment and the World. And Worth was not the only one, as it turns out, to place the Hebrew letters there, to place the Fool in that order, and I would imagine that he's also got, yes, the Justice and Strength reversed from what the Rider-Waite deck has. So we see Justice as 8, and we see Strength, Force, as 11. So basically, he took those Marseille cards and he added the Kabbalistic component. And that is something that was first done by Eliphas Levi in the 1800s. And so Worth was definitely influenced by Levi. And then he also published this book, which you can still get, I believe. This was published by Samuel Weiser. Obviously, this is not the original edition. It's translated. But this book, Tarot of the Magicians, is a book that Worth published in Paris in 1927. So let's go back. In 1889, remember, he put out this deck, and it was only the 22 cards. There was no minor cards. Flash forward a few decades into 1909. That was a big year for tarot. For one, that was the year that Papus, the French occultist, put out his book, the Tarot Divinatoire. And if you want to watch my video on the Papus tarot deck, you can find out a little bit more about who he was. And again, he was largely influenced by Eliphas Levi, and he also put together the Hebrew letters with the 22 major arcana. Now, the same year, 1909, another book came out, and this came out by a man named Eudes Picard, and he put out this book called the Manuel Synthétique et Pratique du Tarot. And while that was a book about the tarot that also had the minor cards, he basically filled in the minors, which Worth did not. And I don't know that deck, there are pictures in that book of Picard's deck, but I don't know that deck ever actually was printed or published, at least not for mass consumption. Now, if you want to find that book, and I don't think that it's been translated, maybe it has, but that's if you want to spend like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. What you can still get, which is not super expensive if you can find one, I was lucky to find one on eBay, is this book. It's the Encyclopedia of Occult Sciences. And so this actually has, in the back, it's funny because it's not listed under cartomancy, which is where you might think the tarot stuff is. It's actually listed in the back under high magic. But the part on tarot in here is taken directly out of Picard's work. And so it has the description of his cards, and it has pictures which are actually not his pictures. These are from the Attila deck, but the descriptions, for instance, it says Ace of Rods. A hand holds a scepter surmounted with an orb, the whole surrounded by flames, and then it has a description of the meaning. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Picard's deck, you can find those answers in this book. And I actually found a really great video here on YouTube. I'll leave the link down below. It's by a channel called The Truth in Story. And the woman who made that video had a photocopy of Picard's book, cut out the cards, printed them, and does a walkthrough of the cards and a comparison with a few other decks. So that's pretty cool. So here I was, I'd kind of like found that this was interesting, but I wanted to get to the bottom of why the associations were different. Were these Levi's associations? Were they papists? Who kind of did it first? Why did Golden Dawn change it? And what I was led back to was actually Kabbalistic source material, this book, the Sefer Yetzirah. This is actually a really old edition. This is by Wynne Westcott, one of the founders of the Golden Dawn. Isn't this interesting that this book, even though Golden Dawn changed the associations, in the Sefer Yetzirah, we have the actual associations that Pappas and Picard, that they used, and Worth. And so in the Sefer Yetzirah, there is something that is called the GRAN version, and it's not the most ancient version. It's a little bit more recent, and by more recent, I think it's still like 15th century. But in this book, there's an outline of the Hebrew alphabet and their correspondences. So there are the 3 mother letters, there are the 12 simple letters, and there are the 7 double letters. Now, esoterically, the 3 mother letters correspond to the 3 mother elements of fire, air, and water. The 12 simple letters correspond to the zodiac signs, and the 7 double letters correspond to the 7 classical planets. So, if you know a little bit about the tarot, you know that the major arcana, the 22 majors, all have a correspondence to one of those things, either an element or a zodiac sign or one of the classical planets. And how they associate varies depending upon the method and the version that you're using. So the elements and the zodiac signs are consistent throughout Golden Dawn, throughout the Sefer Yetzirah, the GRAN version. However, it is the planets that have changed. The planets, as we see them laid out in this version, are different from the correspondences, the modern day Golden Dawn correspondences. So I just became very fascinated with these older style cards. Now the Worth deck didn't have minors, and the Picard deck didn't actually exist in card format. And there was another deck that came out in the early 1900s that did kind of bridge the gap, and we'll get to that in a coming video. But what I found was there's another deck that came out, and this deck actually was published in Spain in 1976, and this is the deck that we're going to open today. So this is called El Gran Tarot Esoterico, and I've had this for quite a while, and part of why I just haven't opened it is because I wanted to kind of get all of the pieces together to be able to share this with you guys. So we're going to go ahead and open this. Now this deck is definitely still available, even though it's an old deck. You can still get your hands on it. I'll make some links down below. It looks like maybe I ordered this. I don't know where I ordered this from. Somewhere online. I might have gotten it on eBay. I might have gotten it on Amazon. Exciting. So, this is published by the Spanish publishing company called Fournier. And this is who originally published it back in 1976, but this edition was published in 2014, so it's definitely still around, still available. Already we can see this just on the side here, part of a heptagram with all of the 7 classical planets. Here is the front. Looks different, right? You know, this already, the illustration reminds me a little bit of the Baleine Oracle, another thing that I showed you guys recently, which is a French oracle, and I have a video out on that. One thing that I found fun to do as I've been doing these unboxings is actually like really talking to the artists that create the decks. I find it's really fascinating. Well, the artist who created this deck is likely no longer living. I know that the woman who directed this deck is not. I believe she passed away in 1993, but she was fascinating. So I'm going to open these up and I'm going to tell you a little bit, and I wish I could know how to pronounce this name, but I think her name is Maritsu It's spelled M-A-R-I-T-X-U, Maritzu Guler. And the artist for these cards was Luis Pena Longo. As I said, published in Spain in 1976. We'll take a look at this in a second, but let's start with these cards. Already I can tell you they're kind of like a unique shape. They're sort of longer and narrower than your standard playing cards. This first card says, Le Grand Tarot Esoterique, the Great Esoteric Tarot. Oh, and that heptagram is right on the back. Sometimes called a heptagram, sometimes called a septagram, as same thing, a 7-pointed star, and you can see the 7 classical planets going around there. Now let's see if these are actually in order. Yep, okay, so what is a little secret here you guys might not know is that if you follow this in order, now do you know that the 7 classical planets correspond to the 7 days of the week? The sun corresponds to Sunday, the moon corresponds to Monday, Tuesday is Mars, Wednesday is Mercury, miércoles, right? And so forth. So if you draw the star, see this is the sun up at the top, and then you draw down, there's the Monday, the moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, that'd be Thursday, Venus, Friday, Freya, Saturday, Saturn. So they go in the order, a little secret tip for you guys. Okay, now we have another title card. And I've explained to you guys why decks of cards oftentimes have 2 title cards, right? Because when they print a full sheet, they don't have just print 78. They have 2 extra spots because they have 80 spots. So that's why there's oftentimes 2 title cards. And so we see another one has the Ouroboros there, the snake biting its own tail. Here's the gal. She wrote the instructions, Maritzu Guler. And right off the bat, here we have El Loco, the Fool. Now, what are you going to recognize here? This is the Fool. It looks definitely different from this version, but similar, but very esoteric. He has a corn husk. I don't know. For a second, I thought this was like a weird grasshopper or something. He's got a stalk of corn here, but he also has the letter Sheen. Remember, that was the letter we saw on this version. That's the second to last letter in the alphabet. It also says 300 down here. Now, 300 is actually the value. Each Hebrew letter has a numerical value. 300 is the value of the letter Sheen. We see the dog. But I don't know, this whole hat is very, very cool, right? Love the brilliant color. All right, let's keep looking. I'll show you these next 2 together because their names are El Consultant and La Consultante. And this, of course, is going to correspond to the Magician and the High Priestess, but looking a little bit more here like Eve, isn't she? And this is just such a cool esoteric deck. He's got the Ankh like you'd see an Egyptian god, and this almost looks like the planets circling like the chakras. The only thing that really conveys a classic magician would be the infinity sign, and then that he's got the wand and he's still doing the as above so below stance. Here's the Empress and the Emperor. You can see he's got that horned crown on there. So the woman who created this deck, she was from a part of Spain called Navarra, which is up on the northern border, right, bordering France. She was born there, and she was recognized in her village. This is interesting. The Hierophant's called El Maestro, the teacher. I like that. She was recognized very early on for her psychic powers. As she grew older and she practiced that, she became interested in the cards. El Carro de Hermes, the Chariot of Hermes. They're not kidding when they call this the esoteric El Gran Tarot Esoterico, right? Look at Justice with like this baby by the feet here. There's the Hermit. He's got his deer. It's almost got like a kind of like a Norse sort of thing. I don't know, like the antlers, the stag. Oh, this one too. Here's the Wheel of Fortune. Look, with this white bear and the twin head is alchemical. And then I don't know if this is gonna focus, but right here we've got a monkey with a crown and he's holding a pinwheel. Interesting. Now you can see this corresponds here to the letter Yod, and over here we see the sign of Virgo. Now the Golden Dawn correspondence would put Yod with the Hermit. So everything's been scooched over one because they didn't start with the Fool, they started Aleph with the Magician. However, they kept the zodiacal correspondence matching the letter. So even though it's shifted over to which major arcana, the letter and the sign are still staying together. Here's Strength. And in 1938, Maritzu married a Swiss man. His name was Giovanni Guler, and so that's where she got the last name, Guler. And I just found it interesting. Was it because she was Swiss that she maybe had an interest in this this method of this guy who was also Swiss, or is that just a coincidence? Who knows? Now this is interesting. The death card doesn't say death, does it? It has no name. Now, I've seen this in more modern decks, and I guess actually the deck that I use, the Kazanlar Tarot, that I read with, also doesn't have a phrase, doesn't say death. And I always thought that the reason why some cards didn't say death on them, some decks, some artists chose not to put that, was some kind of interesting omission because of concern with that word, or not wanting to. I just always, I guess I figured that it was left off just to not upset someone who was getting a reading, just because people get so nervous about that card. Pretty classic moon. This is probably the most classic looking one we see yet, right? And again, you can see the value of the letters down on some of these cards. But now that I'm seeing that this deck chooses to leave off the death card, I absolutely don't believe that it would have been for the purpose of trying to edit or make, calm anybody's fears. I can't imagine that that would be the reasoning. So there must be some other kind of reason why sometimes they leave the word death off. And I've also seen that in this deck that they call the death card, although it's not on there, that card is actually called immortality. So there might be some kind of a secret within that. Now, you might be wondering, what is all of this? Because these cards obviously don't look very much at all like the Worth cards, which were taken from Marseille. These are unique. Well, what does this have to do with this Eudes Picard guy? Well, that's where we get to the minors. So the minors are derived from the Picard descriptions. So again, remember we saw this back in the Encyclopedia of Occult Sciences. And what you're going to see is that they're a little bit reminiscent of the Papist Tarot, but they have they're totally different from the Marseille. And they're creating these geometric shapes here. The 5, you see the pentagram. The 6, you see the hexagram. And then when we get into the higher cards, rather than just having 7 pentacles, what you see is 3 above and 4 below, and a horizon line. Let's look at the 8. Again, you see a separation, an above and below, 4 above and 4 below. It conveys balance, right? Then in the 9, you have 5 above and 4 below. Now 4 is a number of stability. It's the framework, right? It's like a square. Here's 10. Again, we have some symmetry. Then we have some court cards here. And so although, unlike the Rider-Waite deck, we don't see scenes depicting people, we still have a lot more to go off of and a lot more meaning in this version of the minors than we would in, say, a Marseille deck. We see the Venus sign here between the 2 cups. There's so many interesting symbols, things that we might not have seen in other kinds of tarot decks. But even like this bird, this again is reminiscent to me of the Baleen Oracle. Wow, what a beautiful 5 of Cups that is. I love that motif, the owl in the center. And here again, we see the 4 below and the 3 above. Now, another deck that uses this kind of almost like numerology and sacred geometry is the deck that was directed by Manly P. Hall. That deck has a similar kind of way of looking at the minors, and that's actually a deck that has been reprinted, republished in recent years as well. So once Maritzu was married, she ended up moving with her husband to different cities in Spain. They lived in Pamplona. They moved to the mountains of St. Sebastian. This is interesting with this upside down dead fish here, the 3 of Swords. And while she was there, the word of her clairvoyant abilities really started to spread. So people would travel from all over, all different walks of life. People came to consult with her. And she ended up creating 4 different tarot decks. I love this one, the 7. The 7s are very interesting to me, the 3 above and the 4 below. So again, the 4 below conveying stability, and the 3 above conveying the Trinity. So it's an interesting dynamic that we see in that. And then in the 9, we have the 5 above and we have the 4 below. So that it implies a little bit of an imbalance, right? To have 5 above 4. Let's go ahead and take a look here at the Wands. And just like we saw, just like we read earlier, the hand holding an orb surrounded by flames. So we can see that she did use those descriptions back from 1909. Isn't that interesting? Here we see the caduceus, little fox head there. Interesting little guy. So I think that these are definitely pretty cool. Now, what is this? Is this smoke? Well, I'm not sure. Let's look it up. That's the 8 of Wands. They are set in a star. Flames at the bottom of the picture, smoke at the top, representing balance. Okay, so it is smoke. And then it says that the meaning is poise, surroundings favorable to life, the zone of exchanges, commercial transactions. There's the 9, the 10. It reminds me of Nataraj, the Wheel of Fire there. There's the court cards. So this is the GRAN Tarot Esoterico. Fascinating. I really, really love this deck, and I feel like this would be a really good one to do readings with. It's just in my nature to have a very esoteric deck. Even though the letters are different, I'm noticing something actually right now. This is very cool. Okay, here's the court cards. They actually have the letters of the Tetragrammaton, and these would be the same correspondences that I would be used to. So the Tetragrammaton, the fourfold name of God, Yod He Vav He. You see it around the Wheel of Fortune on any deck. And those 4 letters, Yod He Vav He, correspond to the 4 elements, and they also would correspond to the 4 court cards. And that's what we see here. So we see the Yod on the king, the He on the queen, the Vav on the knight, and then the second He there on the page. That's very cool. And then those would also correspond to fire, water, air, and earth. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this little kind of mini history lesson. Got to know a little bit about the creator of this deck and some of the associated decks. Like I said, we'll be taking a look over the course of these 30 days at some other decks that also follow in this similar tradition. If you guys enjoyed the video, please go ahead and give it a like. Come back tomorrow and I'm going to open up another deck for you. Any relevant links I'll leave down below, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.